So, Bill, thank you so much for being part of this conversation series. The future is calling us to greatness. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time.
Wonderful. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
So, Bill, could you please, at the start, just sort of, I don't want to assume that everybody that's listening to this will know who you are and what you're, best known for and that sort of thing. And so, rather than me trying to do an introduction, what I've been inviting all my guests to do is just at the start, just give a sense of, your trajectory. Sort of give us a sense of who you are, what you're particularly passionate about, and that sort of thing. And feel free to take your time doing that.
Okay, wonderful. Well, there's so many different ways to answer that question. I had a very powerful mystical experience when I was 26 years old. There was a, a huge outpouring of support for the, I guess you'd call it, to end the nuclear arms race. It was part of the Nuclear Freeze campaign in 1982,
Sure.
it was the largest demonstration in American history. Not a lot of people really know about it, even though there were so many people there.
Uh huh.
And I was one of the organizers, and it kind of turned for me from a kind of you know kind of well-meaning political organizing event into this full-blown mystical experience where on the day of, which was June 12th, 1982, I found myself really walking in a sea of love that the people at the demonstration were completely different than anything I had experienced before in terms of demonstrations like during the Vietnam days. So it was really an example of if we want peace, we need to be peace.
Wow.
And when you have so many people coming in from all parts of the world to do that, it just it just came into my heart in a profound way. And why am I saying this? Because I was drinking too much at the time, and I was somewhat I didn't really have a sense of purpose. And everything shifted after that, and I really had this sense that I had the sense of the word Gandhi uses is satyagraya, the truth force, that there was this evolutionary trajectory that humanity was on to grow to deeper levels of love and connection and truth and joy and so forth. I wasn't reading in this area. This just all sort of came through on a very intuitive level. And
How old were you at the time?
I was 26 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. So, so yeah. So by orienting me in that direction, I, you know, I saw that to have a life of service was going to be the most fulfilling and the most joyful that I could choose. I saw that wanting to being part of the big picture was where the juice was at. And that's one of the reasons I love your work so much. You're always thinking along those lines. What's really going on here? And and how can we take part for the benefit of all beings?
Yeah.
And so about 10 years later, I was invited to, not 10 years later, 5, 6 years later, I was invited to go to what was then the Soviet Union on a citizen diplomacy trip. And I fell in love with the Russians, and soon thereafter started a not-for-profit to work on environmental collaboration with the not-for-profits there that were just emerging. And then simultaneously, and this is how I think you and I know one another, John Seed and Joanna Macy, who were on the board of advisors of Sacred Earth Network, were really influencing our little team in terms of going beyond, what would you call it, just kind of standard environmentalism or political environmentalism, and feeling into our ancient infinite roots with planet Earth and the universe.
Yes.
And actually helping us really feel what that means. And it's interesting that I would start out talking to you about that mystical experience on June 12th. Well, I feel like I experienced that again with Joanna and John Seed in a kind of a different way, much more visceral and kinesthetic as far as the earth plane goes, really understanding at a deeper level what it means to be an earth being.
Yes.
From the earth, born from the star, made of originally stardust.
Yeah.
So anyway, these two influences of this Russian environmental collaboration, which I could spend a whole hour talking about, but I'm just trying to abbreviate
Yeah,
it.
sure.
Was a profound influence, and what we called it at the time, which I still like, deep ecology was the other major influence, and so our organization kind of took those two directions or approaches, and we did a lot of good service for 20 years. And I think that the piece that leads up to my recent book, published last year, called Wild Earth, Wild Soul, what kind of led up to that book was that within the last 5 or 6 years of Sacred Earth Network's life, we worked extensively with native peoples of Siberia and in this country and in Central America. And the idea was to really get to know what they were still holding for the rest of humanity and how important that was. And so I would say that was the third incredibly or fourth incredibly seminal experience of my work life, starting to work with them, and it influenced what the book is about. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. But I'm trying to lead the listener into both my motivation and a little bit of the history of coming to this point.
Yeah.
So I guess the only other thing I would say is that Thomas Berry says very, very strongly that this aboriginal experience that is in our cells and in our DNA, that remembering that and embodying that is really a critical, and he looked at it as the most critical piece that we need to reclaim for the survival of our species. And I think, given who Thomas Berry is, was and is, that's a fairly remarkable statement.
Yeah,
I think I'll end my my long introduction right there.
Well, no, I appreciate everything you said, and it was one of the things that I have appreciated and admired about your work is this passionate connection to Earth, to life, to reality. I do evening programs now throughout. Connie and I are supporting the Great March for Climate Action, so we're speaking along the route of this 8-month journey that about 50 people are making from that are doing the full thing from Los Angeles to Washington D.C. And
Wow.
I just did a program last night, and one of the quotes that I have from Thomas Berry is the sense that we no longer listen to the the wind and the climate. We no longer have a conversation. We're spiritually autistic, is the language he used.
Yeah.
And and in attempting to try to in attempting to articulate what all indigenous peoples, as far as I know, have had in common, it's an I-thou relationship. It's a personal relationship with what we call nature, reality, and that I agree. One of my favorite quotes from Thomas that I actually use in my evening program, I've got the whole thing memorized, is he says, "The world we live in is an honorable world. To refuse this deepest aspect of our being, to deny honor where honor is due, is to place ourselves on a head-on collision course with the ultimate forces of the universe." He said, "This question of honor must be dealt with before anything else. It's ultimately not a political, economic, or even an environmental issue. It's ultimately a question of honor. Only the sense of the violated honor of Earth and the need to restore that honor will awaken in humans the passion and energy needed to co-create a just and healthy future."
Yeah, right on. He's one of the really important grandfathers, and I know that he was a tremendous influence on both of our lives, and I love that man, and just listening to you sends the chills up my spine. Very, very powerful, and yeah, right on.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Well, and our mutual love and respect for Joanna Macy, also just this older sister mentor on the path. That one of the great joys for me as a father was that a couple of years ago, my youngest daughter, at the age of 21, I think at that time, spent a week training with Joanna Macy, and to have my own child follow that path that's been so soul nourishing for me was really quite a treat.
Yeah, I mean, we're, everybody, everybody, everybody births themselves in quite a remarkable time. I mean, it's all. I think what I'm moved about is our brothers and sisters and mentors and the incredible people we find ourselves with on this journey at this incredibly remarkable time. We've been saying that for a while, but at no other time have we been up against, as a species, that collision course that Thomas talks about.
Yes. Yeah, and the last time I saw John Seed and Ruth Rosenheck, I think we went skinny dipping together, Connie and I and them, down in the Smoky Mountains. Oh God, probably 10 years ago now. That was fun.
Yeah, they're beautiful people, and yeah, we're all in this together. It's great to have this conversation, which is also it's for an audience, but it's also beautiful to connect with you, as a fellow brother that we haven't spoken to each other for a while,
Yeah.
yet we share this very parallel journey.
Yeah, amen. Well, this would be probably a good time to talk about your book, Wild Earth, Wild Soul, and also yeah, just let's start there. Share sort of what you're trying to accomplish in that book and what you're proudest of.
Great, thank you. So I gave the introduction about Sacred Earth Network, and so for 20 years there were there were quite a few powerful influences and experiences and impressions and insights that I realized 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that it was time to share them. And what the book is really essentially about is that we are genetically coded to live in balance with the earth, to use the Native American phrase, with all our relations. And you you spoke to it earlier, to have this embedded. It's more than deeply connected. It's an understanding of our.
Bill, you dropped out. I can't hear you at all. There you are. You back?
I'm back. I haven't stopped talking.
Okay. So the last thing that I heard was, as a Native American, it's more than deeply connected.
Yeah, it's more than deeply connected. There's a oneness and an understanding of our utter dependency upon Mother Earth, that we're children of the earth, that we can't do anything without her constant care. Uh, it's and so it's one thing to understand that intellectually, and it's another thing to experience it. And so my life's work, I believe, for the last, maybe 10 years has been wanting to share that experience with as many people as I can, so that people know that firsthand, and not know it as a sort of modern, or necessarily a modern rehash of something very, very, very old and very ancient. That we have this very old and very ancient understanding of how to live in balance with the earth, and that's what the book is about. And the book takes us through these, what would you call them, kind of cultural ways of living in harmony with the earth. For example,
Okay.
we started out with nature connection, but there's music and art, and there's play, and there's the power of story, and each one of these is a chapter in the book, and there's 10 more, and these are what I believe are the kind of our original instructions of how to get along with each other and get along with the planet. And so the book is not just theory. There's a lot of practice, and it's designed for groups of people to get together and experience what I'm talking about, and to practice this genetic coding, practice our genetic coding, practice our original instructions, so that we realize our indigenousness, and we reclaim our connection to the land that we live in. And the book uses a training that I developed over that 10-year period called the Wild Earth Intensive. And I was thinking about the idea that there's so much theory and so much philosophy out there, but we all know that we don't really learn, we don't take things to heart, and we're not really moved until we experience them. So the book is really a kind of training manual of how to use these, how to practice these original instructions for for our survival and thrival,
Yes.
to coin a term.
That's great. You know what it reminds me of? Did you know Dolores LaChapelle?
I never met her, but she's one of my heroines.
Yes, yes. I remember first encountering her probably 1988 or so. I read Sacred Land, Sacred Sex,
Yes,
Rapture of the Deep,
yes,
concerning deep ecology and celebrating life. And as you're speaking, I'm reminded, by the way, just for the record, I want to highly recommend anybody listening to this conversation, Dolores LaChapelle, Sacred Land, Sacred Sex. It's a fabulous
that's a
book.
great book.
Um, but when you speak of a manual for an ecstatic culture, I'm reminded, and this deep ecological well, you say coding. Thomas Berry talked about that we need to get underneath our cultural coding to this deep genetic coding where we know how to live in right relationship to reality and have a profoundly intimate relationship with nature. So I'm glad that you're also sort of carrying that torch.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the subtitle, because when we're really in touch with that genetic coding, which is our complete interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say it, with the earth and the cosmos, we have an ecstatic relationship, and that, it's not always pretty. There's plenty of pain in the human experience, but it's kind of it's reaching into that place where we're really completely alive with what is this extraordinary, enchanting power that is with us and around us all the time. So, this is all this has all been said so many times in different ways in the mystical traditions, and I just happen to be very personally very moved by the Aboriginal, the original peoples, which we all come from. They're our ancestors. That mode of looking at things, and I'll say one other thing. It's not sort of ecstasy without without responsibility and without really seeing that there's a whole almost protocol for living in right relationship with the planet and with nature, and it's right here, just waiting for us to take part in it and drink from that well.
Yeah.
It's really, Michael. It's really just a simple matter of us for me, a simple matter of us deciding to spend the time remembering who we are, and I love the idea of doing that together with groups. So much of kind of like the New Age or spiritual movement is a little bit too ruggedly individualist. And what I love about Buddhism in particular is the Sangha. So the Sangha, the group of spiritual adherents who are looking for that deeper connection, we just extend that into the natural world. This is really nothing new. But again, I guess a point I really want to underline and emphasize, and I say it almost ad nauseum in the book, is we've just got to. It's a decision. If we want the world that our children can be proud of, talk is cheap. It's really a matter of us practicing it, and I love the experience of the Wild Earth Intensive, and that's one example of some newly emerging, what would I call, training programs, in that experiential training programs that have this whole nature community remembering original instructions as a kind of basis.
Yeah.
Foundation.
That's great. That's great, Bill. One of the things that I have been doing in this conversation series is asking people how they stay inspired in the face of some really scary stuff. I mean, climate change obviously is enormous. Peak oil, the growing gap between the rich and the poor, species extinction. I mean, there's just some really, really scary stuff that we're already in the midst of, much less what's going to unfold in the years and decades ahead, and what our kids and grandkids are going to have to deal with. How do you personally stay inspired to be in action, to do the work that you do in the face of some really scary stuff?
Well, I think I think that one of the most beautiful things about working with Joanna Macy is that she validated my sense that my deep feelings about what was going on in the earth. Um, I needn't suppress them or keep them to myself.
Yes.
And so the first part of the way I'd answer the first part of your question is that we can't keep our hearts open to the pain of this world unless we allow ourselves to feel it. And we can't feel it just by ourselves. We need to feel it with others. And I think Joanna Macy has given us a kind of, how would I put it? A priceless treasure in that. It sounds so simple, but when you've broken down at your sense of complete despair and terror at what we've wrought, but you've come through it with a group of other people, you come out and you notice, hey, I'm still alive, and the
Yes.
trees are still growing, and the waves are still waving, and the stars are still shining. And by God, as long as that's happening, I'm gonna just keep at this thing because it's so much fun, and it's so terrific to feel connected with other people who are taking part in the same thing. So it's like you cry and you rage and you get, you feel your feelings because what you describe is real. That collision course is real. Yet, if we get stuck there, we just get paralyzed,
Yeah.
and then that doesn't do anybody any good.
Yeah, boy, that was well said. I mean, I so agree because I too have found Joanna's work priceless. I think was the word you used in terms of really not only not denying but really honoring. I like that word, to honor our despair, our fear, our anger, all the stuff, the uncomfortable feelings, and to do so especially with a group of people, with others, that we can then just wake up each day amazed by life and amazed by the grace of simply being alive in this incredible universe that we live in and that we are an expression of, to do the work that we do without attachment to how it's ultimately going to ripple out. We don't know. Joanna is a touchstone. In fact, the book that we probably sell more copies of as Connie and I travel North America, her book with Chris Johnston, Active Hope, How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy, is just an amazing
Yeah.
book. Well,
Yeah, that reminds me that one of the chapters in my book is feeling and healing, and that's at the beginning of a Wild Earth Intensive, which is a 10-day program that I mentioned earlier. Uh, it's critical that we meet at that place early on. It actually establishes safety with one another when we just see how fundamentally broken-hearted we all are. To open to the pain in this world, the suffering in this world.
yes.
It's not just it's not just ecocide. It's the whole mess of John Steed used to say that our hardware is in wonderful condition, but our software is malfunctioning. So I'm very excited about being a software technician, and we're not talking about the computer kind.
Yes, I remember my first mentor around this whole new cosmology. He had studied one-on-one with Thomas Berry for 5 years, I think. Albert LaChance. He called himself a cultural therapist. I thought that was
Yeah,
interesting.
exactly.
Well, Bill, when you speak to young people, what would you say to some young person who is just overwhelmed with the challenges and when he or she looks into the future, how scary it is? How what would you offer to a young person? And then a separate question: what would you offer to someone in their senior years?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Because the part one is that the book is really aimed at the 20 somethings, uh, because it was in my 20s that I found purpose in life, but it was in fact largely by accident. And so I really, or by grace, and
Yes.
I would have loved the opportunity to have come into a program or something that would help me find meaning in life. And so, my thought in terms of a young person in despair, besides taking one of my programs or being part of any of the wonderful things that we're involved in, is very simply to, uh, how would I put it? Like, it's largely how we focus, and that if we stay focused on how terrible it is, it can be overwhelming. And so I would invite that young person to focus on things that they really love in life, and to narrow things down a little bit, to find out areas that they feel, or an area that they feel like they can make a difference in. And I don't feel like everybody needs to be an activist in the sense that we think of it. That each person, and particularly a young person who can find their gifts and find what they most want to share, whether it's poetry or singing or dancing or mathematics or whatever, that to the degree that a young person can find what it is that they love to do, then that really balances out that awfulness of the kind of, the pain of the planet that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a very deep, profound question, because I think we care so deeply about how the young ones are gonna come up. But again, I'd like to invite people to take a look at my book, because a lot of the answer to that question is there. So the second part of your question was about older people, and I think that one of the chapters in my book is called Elders and Mentors, and I would invite older people to stand in their power as wisdom keepers, that their experience is certainly in the indigenous traditions is it's a foundational piece. It's how we survive as a tribe within the larger society. We
Yes.
have to have elder wisdom, and so that it's a two-way street. The younger people need to invite the elders into the tribe, and the elders need to be willing to have the courage to step into their power and serve the younger ones coming up. And this is again coming back to what we were talking about before. I think this is actually in some ways it might on the surface seem like cultural coding, but I actually believe it's genetically encoded, this relationship between younger and older. And, certainly in this particular way, it's unique to human beings. But it's so basic that that the older ones are in a kind of both in a true teaching position with their younger counterparts.
Yeah, that's great. I agree on both in fact, I wholeheartedly agree on both the way that you coached a young person. I often invite people to actually create two lists: their great joy and the world's great needs, and then follow their heart. Where are those intersections where their joy and the world's needs or their community's needs intersect? And that, it's sort of, Joseph Campbell talked about following your bliss. This is sort of you're following your bless, like where your bliss is also a blessing to others in some way. And then with seniors, really to find those places where they can step into that mentor role, that guiding wisdom based on their own experience. I mean, there's very few people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s that don't have several things that would be a real contribution to young people in a mentoring kind of way. I mean, that we still learn most powerfully through mentoring rather than through online or classrooms, lots of students and one teacher or whatever. So.
Yes, Michael, and I think that it's almost an art form that's laying dormant or has been lost, and I think that relearning mentoring, I agree with you. It's a very foundational piece of human development.
Yeah, amen. Well, there's a question that Connie has asked me to ask all my guests, and I think I've only forgotten maybe once or twice, but it's fun. And that is that if you had the opportunity to invite any three people in human history, either to a dinner party where all four of you are together at the same time, or a one-on-one, over a beer, glass of wine, or meal, or whatever. But who would those three people be, and why would you choose them?
I think that's a wonderful question. Before I answer it, I just want to say, please send my love to Connie. Tell her I've always loved her book, and I believe it's in my. I can't remember the title offhand.
Probably Green Space. She's written several, but the one that Green
right,
Space, Green Time.
Yeah, Green Space, Green Time. It's in the bibliography of my book, and she always, she's really moved me, and I have the utmost respect for her. So remember to send her my love.
I absolutely will.
And it's no surprise that she would ask such a great question that really, gets the creative juices flowing. So these are the first three people that come to mind.
Okay.
Let's see. I mean, Buddha and Martin Luther King. And then I'd say the third one would be let's see. Maybe you can help me with this because there's so many of them. Give me a female, a female powerhouse, but who does like music and art and has a lot of fun doing it.
Well, that's good what you just shared, because one of the things that's regularly happened is people will say, oh my gosh, I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and, there are others that are going to come to mind. How can I possibly limit it to three?
No, I'm trying to think of who that third person could be. I was actually thinking of some sort of modern entertainer who really looks like she's having a ball. And it's not, actually what we can do is we can leave it up to the listener to decide who fits in that category. So this woman, we can start with her. She embodies the joy of life and of expressing deep passion and beauty, and sings the song of the Creator, and just like reminds everybody that life is worth living, and that despite the suffering, there's still lots and lots of fun to be had. And
that sounds like Dolores LaChapelle to me.
Okay. We can take her, okay. But I guess I was thinking of somebody even more well known.
Oh,
but,
sure, yeah, of course.
But she'll be fine. I just did Dolores LaChapelle sing? Was she very music?
No, not that I know of. She was best known as an amazing deep powder skier, as well as, of course, being a deep ecologist and all.
Right, and that's exactly the kind of the play is what I'm emphasizing right, there. Sure. The play in the universe, that whether it's singing or deep powder skiing or whatever. Sure. And I'd love to have Martin. I'd love to have a beer with Martin. He just. I sort of said that it was by grace that I had that experience in Central Park way back in 1982. And, I think grace is kind of built upon. And Martin Luther King, it almost brings tears to my eyes viewing his speeches as a boy. And, it was more of what the power that was coming out of that man, and what he was evoking in us all, this deep sense of truth and justice, and just sheer power of love that he evoked in all of us. So yeah. I mean, again, you could spend a whole hour on Martin Luther King easily.
Yeah. Well, when I talked to Drew Dillinger, the poet, he actually has done some serious thinking and writing on the ecological heart and mind of Martin Luther King Jr. That a lot of people weren't aware, just aren't aware of that side of him. So anybody listening to this, check out the conversation that I had with Drew Dillinger, because
I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, he goes into it rather in depth. Well, Bill, just in winding down, anything last thing you'd like to say on this theme of the past rooting for us and the future calling us to greatness?
Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, the sense that the past is rooting for us.
Yeah.
The past is sort of, urging us on, is cheering us on, rooting for us, and the future is calling us to greatness.
Yeah, I mean, the person I didn't talk about at all in the three people was the Buddha.
Oh, sure.
And I think that, so here's a guy who lived, 2,600 years ago, and had this profound experience of awakening to completely outside of the box, to an unconditioned perception of reality, and so he's one of the ancestors, just like the algae are one of the ancestors, yes, and the stars are our ancestors. So we're standing on the shoulder of our ancestors who are rooting for us to, to be to be who we are, and to not get caught up in that software malfunction, and the future is calling us to do the same thing. So it's, here we are standing right at this incredibly pivotal point. I mean, now, like right now, and behind us is all of this power from the past, and ahead of us is all this power calling us from the future. But in some senses, how would I say it? Like it's completely not. Those things are just theoretical. That the power from the past and the power from the future are only theoretical unless we're accessing them now. And I mean right now. And I think our conversation is an example of that. And I'm hopeful that in sharing our passion and our enthusiasm and our love for life and our wanting to make a good way for the younger folks, that will inspire other people to access, Eckhart Tolle is right. It's the power of now. It's to really access the power of now to awaken. I think it's a call to awakening, Michael.
Yeah.
It's a call to awakening.
Yeah. Amen.
To our true nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about it. I mean, for me, God isn't a supernatural person that you can either believe in or deny. The word God, as I experience it and use it, is a sacred, proper name, a mythic personification of what's inescapably real, such as time, nature, and mystery. And so much of your work is helping people to live in an intimate rapport with our inner and outer nature as one nature. And what we're now talking about is this intimate rapport with time, with the past and the future. And of course, the only place you can do that is right here, right now, in the present moment. Well, Bill, this is fabulous.
Well said, Michael. Well said. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So, if people want to go more deeply into your work, where do they go?
They go to billpfeiffer.org. That's PFEIFFER, billpfeiffer.org, and they go grab the book Wild Earth, Wild Soul. I really hope people will just take a look at the reviews on Amazon, even if they don't buy it from Amazon, because the book has been quite well received, and I'm very, very proud of it.
That's awesome.
And I didn't go into it earlier, but I view the book very much as one of those essential tools that we want, in whatever our new version of Noah's Ark is.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, thank you so much. Just blessings on you and your work. And I'm just thrilled that we were able to have this conversation and reconnect.
Michael, thanks so much. It's a great opportunity to express my deepest values, and we all love to do that. So thank you.
Yeah.